for Uproxx. We are here today with Play Like a Girl for a panel that's really focused on press and publicity for bands. So this is something that comes up all the time, especially in the digital world where there's more outlets than ever, more ways to interact with journalists than ever. So we have a bunch of experts here who are going to just discuss this specific issue. We're calling it Pitch Perfect. I'm gonna let them all go down the line and introduce themselves, and then from there, we will get into some topics. So why don't you start, Katie?
Hey guys, I'm Katie Bain. I'm a freelance writer here in Los Angeles, and I write for a bunch of places, primarily Vice, LA Weekly, RBMA, and anyone else that will give me money for words. Yeah, that's me.
Hi guys, I'm Danielle Bacher. I'm also a freelance journalist. I write for Billboard, Rolling Stone, Esquire, GQ, Vanity Fair, a lot of places, and I tend to do profiles and investigative stories.
Hey guys, my name is Christine Morales, and I've been a publicist for over 10 years. Currently I do PR for Epitaph and Anti-Records, and yeah, PR is my game.
Hi, I'm Mara Shalhoup. I'm editor-in-chief of LA Weekly. I am the person who gets the pitches in the inbox, the press releases, the writers coming to me asking if a story will work, and the editor who's getting pushed back on and saying, give me more stories. So I'm sort of the jerk.
Hey, my name is Caroline Borolla, and I've also been doing PR for over 10 years, which is insane. And I'm happy to answer anybody's questions today. Yay!
Thanks so much, ladies. Okay, so I think that the first sort of thing that I wanted us to go over is, something that we're seeing more and more as the internet becomes more and more powerful is like this idea that everyone has their own brand. And I think maybe a decade ago, bands weren't seen as a brand or whatever, and now there's such an element of figuring out where you fit, figuring out who your audience is, figuring out how you talk about yourself. And I think that that can be really foreign to kids who are just playing guitars in their basement, and then suddenly they're like, oh wait, I really want to do this. Like, how do I go from me and you playing keyboards to what our band is, what our brand is. So I think that my initial question was, how do you talk about your band? Like learning how to communicate what you mean, say, sound like, what you want to accomplish. And I think I will ask Christine to start off here because she has a lot of bands, I think, who have really strong brands, and I think that a lot of that work is done by publicists who know how to work that angle. And I think that the point is, to like make sure that information is accessible for everyone, and that can be a problem. So let's start with you there.
So I've worked with a lot of young bands over the span of my career, and I have a young artist who will come in and they're super talented and they might be a little shy or not know how to talk about their who they are. And I think that when I'm presented with that, first we have to know the person, the band, and figure out what makes them a person. I know you make music. I know that your inspirations came from somewhere, but like who inspired what you are. So I think maybe what musicians I've worked with don't always see the correlation between their music and their maybe personal life, and I think it's important to set those boundaries, but think about what you can bring from your personal life that can be applied to your band image. So for example, I remember working this band a couple years ago, and it was they released this beautiful record, and it was hard for me to get press. Though the music was gorgeous, I was trying to find a story, trying to find an angle, and halfway through the press campaign, the singer told me, he's like, oh, by the way, I wrote this record while I was in my apartment with a broken leg because I couldn't walk, I couldn't afford healthcare, so I was in my house for 2 months, and I was like, this why this record's so beautiful, because you were so anguished and you were so sad, like this is the story. And so that became the story of the record. And sometimes that stuff doesn't reveal itself to a publicist until later on in the campaign. But I think that, you know, when a band is starting out, you obviously have an idea of who you are, and when you get to the point where you have a publicist, you have a manager, and you have an agent, like it's your job to know who you are and tell them how to talk about you, because they're your advocate, and they need to know what to talk about. So when you're thinking about what that is, you know, think about who you are as a person. Sometimes I work with bands that are like, hey, you know, we're a jazz noise band, and like, that's great, but actually people see you as a pop punk band. And it's like, oh, okay, like that's what we are. And then you have to be realistic about it. Like, you might have those influences when people see you, they're like, yeah, you're a pop punk band, and that's more sellable than a jazz noise band. So don't take that personally. It's just like how the world works. And then if you're confused about things, like maybe ask people. You know, you've played shows, you've had a following. That's what, you know. What do you think of our band? What are we to you? And get some ideas, brainstorm, and then have like an elevator pitch. I know that's super hokey, but like know how to talk about yourself. Have like 3 talking points that you can tell. Like bands that have interviews for the first time, like, we don't know what to talk about. I'm like, yes, you do. Come up with a list of 5 things, and those are the things that you talk about in detail. Talk about yourselves. Personal lives, I guess, influence music more than maybe musicians realize. And have a bio. Get a bio written about you, short or long, but have that so it can be distributed to, you know, people like the editors on stage. They know about, you know, your band and how to write about you, what words to use, what pronouns to use, how you want to be talked about, who your influences are, and that answers it.
Totally. I think you said something really important that I want Caroline to build off of, which is this idea of sellable, which is not something that people who are very passionate about music like really want to talk about. Like, they want to talk about the art, they want to talk about the passion and the purity of it. But I think there has to be a balance there. Like, is your art something that other people want to hear? And how do you find the people that do want to hear it, that believe in the same ideals as you? So, Caroline, if you can kind of build off that concept of, you know, the balance between staying true to your art and the impulses behind creating music, and how you get that to the right ears and to the right people.
I actually also wanted to kind of elaborate on something that Christine was saying, especially for new bands. I think having a solid bio, like I've had a lot of like new bands that are like, oh, we want writers to kind of think about it for themselves and like, you know, come to their own conclusions about our music. And I think to a degree that happens, but I think also that you need to realize that there's so many bands and people get so many pitches and so many emails that you kind of need to give them a starting point, rather like, you know, here's this music and it speaks for itself, which it does to an extent, but especially for developing artists, like you need to give people a starting point at least, and like have some sort of story and have, you know, something going versus just like, you know, here's another SoundCloud link, or here's another, you know, Dropbox or whatever, and that's definitely something that I've come across, especially in like newer bands, in terms of, you know, telling a story and like kind of just elaborating on what Christine said. And for me personally, I always love to know those things in advance, like what you do outside of the band that helps develop you as a person. Like, you know, one of the most extreme things that I've ever done was one of the musicians that I worked with was a bird biologist as his day job, and he was on some team, I don't know, bird biologist that deemed a bird extinct or something, and so we got all these outdoor publications to write about it. And another one is like, one of the bands I work with, the lead singer he's a bartender in LA at some fancy bar, and we did the album stream on Tale of a Cocktail, and they did a cocktail for every drink on the record, and at their listening party they served those cocktails, so it was like something that people could kind of put together, versus just like, oh, here's another album stream, because how many of those are put out a day, where it's like you need something that kind of sets yourself apart from the others and makes it more interesting and makes it stand out. So and then your question.
Well, I don't know if you kind of got into it. like
Okay.
finding the right audience for your music
Yeah.
and keeping in mind those concepts of like, people need something to latch onto.
Yeah, like-
Every record that anyone's fallen in love with is because it related to them in some way. So finding the people that relate.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, you know, how many, like, you know, records were recorded in a cabin in the woods in upstate New York? We don't need any more of those. Like, have something, you know, have something else. Like, even if that is the case, like Christine said, like, my leg was broken when I recorded this in the cabin in the woods in New York. All right, cool. Like, you know, like, not just like, here's, you know, I think there needs to be a little bit more of a story, which can be a bit of a challenge for developing artists, but I think, you know, talking and asking as many questions as possible and like coming to these kinds of things can help, and just like, I don't think it's bad to ask questions, especially when you're starting out, and just like finding somebody that's supportive. You know, I think like all of us, we all go to shows and we all see a lot of bands that we're really passionate about, and I think that's at least how I got started, and I think, you know, finding that person that's willing to work with you and like help develop things, and that's really key.
For sure. Mara, if you wanted to weigh in next, I think as someone who is an assigning editor so much of the time and is the one sort of looking for these narratives, looking for things that will appeal to your readers, what goes into that for you? What do you find compelling?
Well, I would not propose that anybody go out and break their leg to get on our radar. But that kind of stuff, you know, the humanizing aspect of your life. What do you bring to your music? What makes you distinct, as you said? Like, stand out as a human being, not just as a musician. We're looking for stories. Like, we love music. You're not trying to sell us on your band. We probably like it if it's good. Like, but we are trying to sell our audience on your band. And we sit around in these meetings and say, okay, like, we have to look at some pretty, I'm not gonna lie, it's craven stuff. How many Facebook followers do they have? How many Twitter followers do they have? Like, how good is the art? You know, if any of those things are not great, you know, we might have to pass. And it's not because we don't love the music. It's because we can't find a hook to get our own readership excited about a thing. So, you know, I love the idea of the cocktails. Like, we're always a fan of that. So, like, you know, but any way you can kind of tie in the outside world to your music, especially in these days where there's so much going on that's horrifying and important, and, you know, if somebody is like finding, doing outreach with different communities, that's a big deal to us. So like different disenfranchised groups, especially musicians who are from those disenfranchised groups, that's more of an in, because these communities deserve recognition. So finding that other hook, so cocktails, broken leg, you know, fringe groups, whatever. I think that's, you know, when I'm sitting here saying we have more bands than we have writers to write about them, how do we make that decision? Even if you could put yourself in the shoes of the person making that decision, what would you want that person to know about you when they have a 30-second window before they're going to pass on a case? Like, that's kind of the long and short of it. So.
Yeah. And for Danielle and Katie, whichever one of you wants to go next, I think that you are in sort of a different spot as, like, I'm an editor. I don't primarily write anymore. I love writing, but I'm doing much more of the assigning and stuff. As people who are primarily doing writing and reporting, how do you sort of work with bands that you've fallen in love with to find a way to get that pitch landed? What are some of the things that stand out to you there?
Well, I think everything that's been said here is pretty dead on. Like, as a writer, like Mara said, we're looking for a story. I can love your music, but if there's no narrative there, then I have nothing really to write about except to say that this music is beautiful. But, you know, with a hook, we're really looking for the same thing as a writer, I think, as an editor, because we're in the pitching process too. So we kind of have to sell it to the editor as well, in the same way that the band kind of has to sell it to us. And so just give me a unique angle. Like, I got an email last week from a publicist who said my artist has synesthesia. So his latest album was recorded because he saw all of it and then heard the sounds. And it was like, that's something that I've never heard before. You know, you have a broken leg, a unique medical condition. It's like, just anything that's unique and is gonna land with readers, and just give me something to sink my teeth into as a writer, where it's like, yeah, it is overwhelming, and I'm sure it's the same for you guys to get so much music in your inbox every day, and a lot of it's good, and I wish I could write about all of it, but I can barely listen to all of it. So if you give me the good music plus an interesting hook, you know, your chances are vastly better.
I agree with Katie. Coming from the angle of having to pitch to an editor. A lot of editors also get a lot of pitches from a lot of other journalists, and you're competing with a lot of wonderful, talented journalists, so also your pitches have to be skewed to something not only they want and the publication wants, but also they think their audience would want and you're interested in writing about. So there's a lot of components to it. I know when I first started, one of the first things I did was I had this column at the LA Weekly, and I hung out with pretty much no-name musicians and spent lots of time with them. And so I would go out at night and hang out with them and really experience what they experienced, kind of Gonzo, Hunter S. Thompson style. So I would hang out with a rapper, or, you know, whoever it was, and just really immerse myself in their culture. And it was one way to not only tell a story, but tell it in, you know, a unique way that I was like doing whatever they wanted to do. You know, we'd go underground and hang out at clubs for like, God knows, till 6 in the morning. So it was just a way to tell a story without being like, okay, so you grew up where, and like, what's your name, and what's your bio? It was just like, oh, let's tell our own story. So that was one way I got around kind of doing it.
Just to bounce off that, like as an artist, if you give us a unique scenario of like, hey, let's go go-karting, or let's go do something unique, that's gonna stick out to us too. Like, give us a unique way to do the interview and to tell the story versus just like you said, like a phone interview or just hanging out at a coffee shop, and that'll pique our interest and make your chances that much better.
So I wanted to talk about something that's a little bit of a trend recently. And I'm not really sure how I feel about it. I don't know if I have negative or positive feelings about it, so I would love to get some input on this. It's this idea, and everyone's gonna know what I'm talking about, of the mysterious band. Like, there's no information, and like, using that as the narrative and that as the hook has become such an overwhelming thing lately of like, you can have the song, but you can't have any information, you don't know who it is, you don't know who the band is. And I think when it first developed as a trend, maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, like, it was cool, and like I got it, and like I think it's sort of arisen as an antithetical element to the everyone knows everything about you on the internet now culture that has kind of developed. But I'm wondering how it works for you guys, and how you see that developing, or maybe even from the publicist angle, like how you work with bands who want to do that, from other writers, how it strikes you, because sometimes as an editor, I'm like, I mean, we've just gone over that, like the narrative is what pulls us in. So if I'm being told you don't get to have that, you only get to have the music, on one hand I'm like, oh, okay, I see what you're trying to do, but on the other hand I'm like, but then I have nothing to work with, like what am I supposed to write? So I just want to get some input on that trend.
I've worked with, before I was at a label, I worked with a PR agency, and I worked with a label that all of their artists wanted to be mysterious, all of them, every artist. It's like, we make this ethereal electronic music, and you know, we live somewhere in London, and I wear a sheet over my head, and that's my bio, here's my photo. My photos of my shoulder work with that, and it's like, what am I gonna do with that? Like, your music's great, I don't know who you are. I sometimes didn't even know who the artist was. I would email with them, to the extreme of one time, I set up an interview with an artist and a major publication, and the artist did something to their voice. Their voice was like mutated during the interview, and the writer was like, hey, the interview was great, but I had no idea what they were saying. Like, they obscured their voice, and I was like, wow, okay, you know, I'll try and get another interview, like, I'm sorry that happened. The interview ended up never running because the writer had no material. I respect that as an artist, like, I respect an artist's, like, vision and representing yourself and taking control of your image, but at the same time, you have to realize that people that are in the industry need a hook, need an angle, need sellability, and a photo of your shoulder or anything obscure isn't really a selling point. You know, there's nothing to work with there. And then on the like extreme end, you have people like you know, Lady Gaga and Beyonce sharing very intimate parts of their life, and though it may be not completely real, cultivate your narrative. Like, you know, maybe you decide what you want to share. You don't have to share everything, but decide what you want to share with the public. Decide what you want to put on your Instagram. You know, there's parts you can keep personal. You don't have to share everything. I think you need to set healthy boundaries, but think about that. Don't, you know, think you can be mysterious, because like even the most biggest pop stars aren't being mysterious anymore. So, you know, how can anyone love what you do if you're not giving them anything? It's like, you know, it just doesn't work. It works very seldom. You know, eventually even like musicians that are unless you're Daft Punk, it probably doesn't, you know, won't work. And even then, like,
and they came up in a different era, so
exactly.
I don't know if that would work in 2017.
Yeah, the internet's changed everything. Like, so I would say think about what your boundaries are, but share whatever is comfortable to you. Cultivate a narrative, as long as it's true, as long as you're not faking a story. Because I've had artists do that too, and that ends up blowing up in your face. So don't fake things either.
But, and I think I want to move to Caroline next. I think there is a flip side to the faking the story, is the sort of the fictional narrative of the stage persona, or you have a stage name, or you have, you know, two sides to your artistry. There's like your personhood and then your artist personhood. And I think that can actually work and allow some separation. So maybe you can include that in whatever.
Yeah, I actually have a pretty good example. I work with a band, and it's two females that are actually in other bands and have disguised themselves and just wanted to do art for the sake of art. No one knows who they really are. They hide their faces, wear wigs, and people have tried to out them, which has been really interesting. And I always connect every phoner because they don't have phone numbers that match where they say they're from. There's this whole story about how they met, and we have a cheat sheet about we Googled everything about the city they say they're from that we refer to in every interview, where it's like bullet points, like you went to this park, you have a dog that's named this, so that's one that, and they've been mildly successful. They went on tour with friends of theirs who actually never figured out who they are and tried to actually make out with them. So that has gone really well. That project started about, yeah, that's kind of awesome. One of them's related to one of them, so that's even weirder. I mean, I think that one has been pretty successful, but that was 4 years ago when it started, and people kind of gave up, you know, like they don't care as much as they used to. But I think it's really hard now. I mean, I think with the internet and like you said, like people were trying to out them and people were trying to figure it out. So I don't think it works very often. You know, you're lucky if you do, and I think it's cool to be, you know, art for the sake of art, but also like providing people with information and providing people, especially when you're coming up, it makes it easier for everyone, and that record, those records, multiple records, were a bit of a challenge, you know, especially on the side of me and the band. You know, it's a lot of work to hide yourselves and, you know, wear wigs or, you know, face scarves or whatever when you're showing up into the venue, because you don't want people to photograph you during sound check when you're not in your costumes, you know. So I think you kind of need to think about how much you do want to put into that, because if you do slip up, or if you know, post something on your Instagram that meant to go on your personal Instagram and it goes on the band's one, you know, it's like things like that where it's like, you know, such a minor slip could kind of spoil things for what you have going on. So I think, you know, developing more of a story is generally better, especially for, you know, bands that are trying to start out. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I think that's great context. I want to send it to the journalists now and talk about how you guys feel about this, especially when there is a false narrative or a double life situation like she's talking about. I mean, Danielle, I know you do investigative work. Like, at some level, it's our job to uncover this kind of stuff. So how do you work with those boundaries or those sort of ethical concerns? Maybe that could be part of this. You don't necessarily have to go there.
There's, I mean, an interesting semi-analogy, it's not musician, but Angeline, who was recently outed, as some of you might know, that was, a person who built their persona over many years, pre-internet, and the right person to do that. She had everything it took to sustain that other identity. But I think for the most part, it's unless you have a big reveal and you're probably already sort of famous or well-known, it's not gonna work. And the second time that shtick comes across my desk, I'm gonna be oh my God, this again? We did one story about this, we're not gonna do 3. So I think that there's a short attention span among a group of people who unfortunately have to have too short of an attention span already, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I echo that sentiment personally, actually.
Yeah, I'm not into it. I like to get deep with people and real with people and talk for extended periods of time. And if someone's not giving me something, I'll just, there's another story out there that someone will. I guess for me, things that do interest me is if someone hasn't talked for a long time and something really catastrophic's happened, like YG's publicist reached out to me and said, he just got shot. Do you want to talk to him for a first time? Yes, hell yes, I do. But, things like that I'm interested in. But to just sit there, have this mysterious band I've never heard of and, not wanting to talk about their lives. And I'm not saying you have to be so personal and talk about every single thing that happened to you, but we are journalists, we want a story, and I think ethically, I wouldn't be able to just publish something where I was going along with their persona. I want to know the real them, or it's just not interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. It doesn't serve the readers. It serves the band when you're helping construct their fake narrative. And it's not an interesting story because you don't know what's real, so who cares? It's like Mark, it's a fad. It's interesting one time, and then it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think that there is so many boundaries there. That is really in this, especially in this era, hard to sort of unpack. And I think maybe a lot of musicians don't understand how much their personhood will become part of their art and part of their story, and that's sort of how the music industry operates right now. I think even for journalists, or for publicists, this can happen. You sort of have to be a public figure also, and especially if you're younger, in your early 20s, or maybe even a teenager, that can be really overwhelming. So I understand the impulse, but personally, I do sort of echo some of the sentiments here. It can be tough to be telling a fake story or to not really have a real story to latch onto. But I want to pivot a little bit to another topic that I think comes up a lot now and is a little bit personal to me. My father is transgender, so within my family we've gone through the transition and dealing with pronouns and how gender politics work in 2017. Obviously there's a political element here, especially with the president that we currently have, and this comes up a lot in music. It comes up a lot. And it must come up a lot in a lot of other industries as well. I just happen to work in this one, but I really do feel like this has been a place where there's been a lot of conversations about it, and there's been a lot of opportunity for fans to learn. Laura Jane Grace is a great example. I guarantee you a lot of Against Me fans weren't well up on their gender politics until she came out. So I wanted to talk with you guys a little bit about how do you navigate that space when you have a client or when you're doing a story and you're trying to say the correct thing and there's a lot of fear there for messing up, or it's my dad and I mess up, I say the wrong thing, I have memories and years of history, so I think that online it can become a really negative conversation or become a really scary conversation. I just wanted us to be able to have it here in a little bit more of a personal setting.
I think knowing your client and knowing how comfortable they are speaking about it, and when journalists do have interviews with them, prefacing this is the pronoun they use or this is what they're comfortable talking to, and I think it's great that it's subtle, where it doesn't need to be the focus of a story, I've actually come across journalists that say I only cover women that are, transitioning or, gay or whatever, where it's like they don't cover cisgender males, which is really interesting. Where they're like, there's a couple of them that have just been like, no, this is not for me, this is what I cover. And so I think knowing who you're pitching it to and how you're pitching it, because there's certain people where are going to be tactful about it. We've done this long enough where it's like, okay, this will be a good interview, they'll treat you with respect, versus like just giving those kinds of interviews across the board, and especially, if it's in a bio or if it's in, a press release or whatever, like I think that just making sure that who is conducting the interview, who you're speaking with them is tactful is always helpful.
Yeah, to your point, choosing the right journalist and also letting that journalist know how far your artist wants to go in that conversation. Because I just wrote a profile recently about a transgender woman who was transitioning, and she wanted the story to be about the transition because she had had a public image previously as a man and wanted to make it really clear to the audience, what the situation was. And so going into that interview, I knew that she was prepared to really go there and that I would have to be prepared to go there as well. And I think it was a learning curve to a certain extent for both of us, but because we both knew that we could be open and sort of, no holds barred, it made for a better conversation between us because there was no awkwardness, and I didn't necessarily feel like I was going to step on her toes by asking anything she wasn't comfortable talking about. But that had been made very clear before the interview even happened, that that's what we were there for.
I've worked with a lot of young people who are in bands, and they maybe they're transitioning, maybe they're still figuring out who their person is outwardly. Maybe they're female passing, maybe they're male passing, but they don't identify that way. And when people go to see your band, they're going to make assumptions about the way you look. And I'm a publicist, so it's my job to get the story out there, if an artist is comfortable telling that story, like, hey, I'm young and confused and I'm trying to figure this out, this is a part of my music, then I would pitch that. But I'm also an artist advocate, and if they don't want to share that, don't share that. Like, if you're exploring yourself through your music, explore yourself through your music. Don't feel like you have to share everything. Like, I want to tell these editors about the story, but if you're not ready, don't do it yet, because it's just too much, because you're so young. If you are young, yeah.
Piggybacking off of that, a thing that happens all too often is once you tell one reporter something, once it's out one time, there's no taking it back, and nobody else is going to not publish it because you don't want them to after it's already out there. That's a really tricky situation. So every decision to reveal information about yourself needs to be taken, as a serious matter. Like, it will follow you, and you cannot force that information out of future press about you.
I was just going to add to that. I've done a few stories, one being I researched this transgender strip club for many months, and the story ended up not coming out, but first and foremost, it's just asking, what is comfortable for that person. After all, we are just humans, so there's no problem if you don't know to just say, hey, what do you like to identify with? And same with, in the same vein as sexuality, I've interviewed gay musicians or whatever you identify as. And I remember I did a story with Sid the Kid from Odd Future for Playboy, and I remember this is around the time where she really didn't want to talk about being gay. So we just had a really open discussion about, what it meant, what she was interested in, and as soon as, something she wanted to tell me that she really didn't want in the story, she would say, off the record, this is what it is. On the record, this is what I feel comfortable with. So, you can also work with a musician. It's not all about, getting something in the press or a headline just to, pull the woo over their eye. It's more like you want to also have a really good story, and you want that person to feel comfortable with you and trust you. So I think it works both ways.
Yeah, I think it's just so important for queer artists to like Christine said, know that they don't have to make that the main narrative. Like Mara said, like know that their music is going to be more important than that, or at least like that's what so many of us are working toward. Like so many editors and writers that I know share those values, and I think sometimes it seems like they don't, or it's sensationalized, and I just wanted this to be a place where it could be spoken to, you know, young musicians who are confused, anyone who's grappling with this. Like there is a lot of people who care about this and it's important to them, and I just wanted that to be like communicated. I just wanted to have a conversation about defining features based on gender, or how we best combat historical discrimination, because I've seen both sides of the argument. I've seen the argument that the Times made that, you know, there's this historical systemic sexism that we're combating by highlighting just these artists that are women. And then I've also seen the argument, which I find is very convincing, that maybe it does more harm to specifically make the fact that they're women be the thing that they're highlighted for, instead of highlighting them across the year in your coverage the same way that you would men. Like I have been thinking about this personally, because so far my two favorite records of the year are the Lorde record, a pop album by a 20-year-old, and the War on Drugs record, which is solidly dad rock by like a very well-known like white rocker guy. And to me, those live alongside in my brain, but I don't think that there's a shared audience for those bands, or maybe there hasn't been, and that can definitely go farther than just gender. But I wanted to lead it off with that feature because I thought I saw so many conversations around it that I thought were really interesting.
Last night I was at a show and I saw a band that it was two cis males. They were very white, and they were playing rock. And they were really into it. They were super into it, and there was a lot of really happy white dudes in the audience, and it's great. But I think that they're like, I did some research, and their thing is like, we're bringing rock back, and we're going back to the old days, and you know, we wear suits on stage, and we're, you know, rock dudes. And when I hear that, I think, okay, that's cool, like, I like rock, I like guitar, then I think about, like, what they represent. It's like, oh, that's probably a time when there wasn't a lot of women playing guitars, and there wasn't a lot of people of color playing rock music, and that's what I assume that they mean, that maybe they're hindered or feel intimidated by someone like Mitski or Angel Olsen coming to play music, and it's like, wow, why is this, you know, lady getting all this coverage and I'm not, because I'm a talented white dude. So I grapple with that too, because I work with a lot of talented white dudes, and it's hard to sometimes get them coverage. But at the same time, I'm like, give me an angle, or, you know, it's time to maybe represent other people that weren't represented before, and representation matters. I think it's important to normalize that women play music. Women have been playing music for a very long time, but you know, festivals are headlined by males, and you know, me, growing up, I listened to a lot of pop punk, and I would see white dudes on stage, and like, oh, that's what a band looks like that's a band. But you know, as I get older, I'm like, wait a minute, like, I probably could have been in a band too, but I just didn't see that. Like, I didn't see women on stage, I didn't see people of color on stage, so normalizing, changing things, what it means to be a band, like a person that, of different, you know, variations of privilege can be in a band. And that the New York Times thing, like, I read it and I loved it, I loved all those bands that are in there, but then, you know, the most interesting story about a person isn't that, oh, she's a woman, like, she's a lady and she plays guitar, isn't that cool? Like, wow, I didn't know that lady could play a guitar. It's like,
it can come off condescending. Although I also love every band in that Times piece, just for the record.
Yeah, and so even when I was starting as a publicist like over a decade ago, I was totally a victim of this, because that's what writers gravitate towards. But you know, sometimes the top of my pitch would be, this woman made a song, and that would get attention. But it's like, I was like, wow, maybe I'm doing more harm by doing that, by saying this woman makes music, and then it would get press. But it's like, that was, looking back, I'm like, God, that was really dumb. But, you know, I think it's just like normalizing it, normalizing conversation, and maybe making it, you know, women is not a genre, women is not, it's not amazing that women, women can write music like we can, just like representation matters. So, I don't know, maybe find another angle, like, it's not a woman plays guitar, it's something else. She happens to be a woman, or whatever, identifying.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, recently I had a press release that I had set up, and it's a duo, and they're 2 women, and they made me take out women from anything in the press release, because they're like, would you say that if this was a male? And it's, no, you wouldn't. So I think just being conscious of that, and for me personally, like, I love you know, gear things, and I work with another band that's, you know, super technical, and like pitching that, you know, to like reverb or she shreds or things like that. It's awesome, but I also do wish that there was more of those kinds of things, because it does, I mean, it does seem very trendy and very current right now, but I think that if there were more publications like She Shreds or things like that, I think it might feel a little bit more normal, where it's like we have 2 or 3 things that just focus on women, where if there were more, it would just be like, okay, cool, we're sending this out to, you know, these 10 publications that also cover women, but also being able to send that to Guitar Player, Guitar World, all those kinds of things, you know, like, I think that would be great. And I've recently started working with some Fender reps, and you know, one of them was like, I want to do more with women. Like, that's great, but you know, why is that? It does feel like very trendy, and I think it's great, but I also wish it wasn't that way, and I wish it was kind of just like across the board. And I do think that right now a lot of the female acts that I'm working with are getting more coverage than like, here's another, you know, male duo or whatever making pretty pop songs. It's like, people don't care as much, just because it seems like people want to latch onto like the fact that here's this, you know, talented female or whatever. Like, I think right now it is a little bit of a harder sell for, you know, straight white dudes that are coming up versus like, you know, a woman that's, you know, got a super amazing record and, you know, is gear oriented or whatever. I think that's just, at least that's my experience right now, that it's a little bit of an easier sell.
Right, I mean, I know that harassment against not just women, but everybody is somewhat ever present in the music industry and other industries too. But there was sort of a rash of people coming out last year, roundabout, with pretty gruesome stories of harassment. At the time, we were struggling as to what to do, and like, I wanted it to be a more positive thing, and I was fielding different pitches from different writers around this. And the one that really struck, it took a lot of time to refine this. I was like, I don't want to just pick out women in the industry who are doing a good job. Like, no, that's treating women as musicians as something different or other or exotic, and they're not. But the writer did a good job of saying, okay, let's find the ways in which women have fought back against misogyny and won. Like, let's celebrate the battles that have been fought. Not to say they're over, but I mean, it was harder than it sounds to come to that conclusion. I love when somebody could pitch me a piece like that, a publicist, a writer, a band itself. Like, that is what we want to see, for sure.
Well, I think also, I think in terms of stories, it's also about giving women not only a voice, but telling stories about women and their experiences. I know for me, it's not always conscious, but I do tend to gear towards writing sometimes struggles about women, getting their stories out there. I had written a story in Billboard about Kesha's experience with Dr. Luke, which was very hard for me to, you know, go through that and talk to, you know, 40 plus subjects about what happened and, you know, interview everyone. But I think the important part is getting the story out there and not just focusing on, well, she's a woman that plays music, but also, you know, what is her experience like? What has happened to her? You know, the same as Mara said, you know, what misogyny has happened in the industry.
How do you set healthy inter-industry communication boundaries? So I think that this has become more prevalent than literally ever before, because there are like 17 social media platforms that bands or journalists or record labels have profiles on, and there are just so many ways to get in touch with people. So I think that the first place where this starts is sort of having a publicist. A publicist is sort of the gatekeeper for bands for how you talk to journalists. And I think that this has kind of been touched on a little bit. One of you was talking about when a band has a manager and an agent and a publicist, but it's like, maybe you're not at the point that you need that yet. You kind of have to figure out at what point you need all of those things before you're just sending money into the void. You know, you might not be big enough to need an agent yet. You might just be touring in, or like the city and the region that you live in, and you can set that up yourself. So I guess the first question is, do I need a publicist? And setting up healthy boundaries if you have one or if you don't have one, and how that can work for bands.
I'm going to be out of a job after this, but you don't need a publicist.
You won't be out of a job because you're fabulous, but
when you're first starting, you don't. You don't need one. Play shows, tour, find your scene, find your people, figure out who you are, make a story, make a record, make good music, develop something. Press will organically happen for you if something's moving. You'll meet people who know other people, network, figure out your boundaries in that way, talk to other bands that are on the same level as you, or maybe like have more experience. And you don't need a publicist until you have possibly a label, a tour, a record, and something that makes it either a focused regional story or a national story. Don't try and hire a publicist for your bedroom project yet. Figure out your bedroom project, make that into something, and then, you know, along the way, get a publicist. Don't get a publicist first thing. That's not what you need. You need to be a musician first. And now I don't have a job.
Also unemployed. I mean, I totally agree with what Christine was saying. I think that there's so much people can do on their own, especially with, you know, all the social media platforms where you can promote yourself, and don't be afraid to promote yourself. I have a band right now that I'm working with that does not have a label, but it's cool, we're working together. And they're a little bit scared of selling themselves, and I think that you need to be your own advocate. Like, you need to not be afraid to talk yourselves up. You need to go to shows, you need to meet people, and I think that's a huge part of it, like creating your scene, like especially in LA. Like, I think LA is such a welcoming music community. You know, I go out way too much, and I see the same bands and I see the same people, and it's like developing and cultivating those relationships where you can be like, oh, okay, like I want to play with this band, and then they end up, you know, playing the hi-hat or whatever, and you end up opening for them because you saw them and you met them and you're friends, and then you're kind of making your own story. And then when you do have something that needs to be kind of taken to the next level, then talk to us, so we have jobs. I just think that, kind of repeating what everyone else said, that, you know, it gets to the point where it's like you can put things on Facebook, you can put things on Twitter, you can, you know, follow journalists, and I think that needs to be done with caution. You know, like don't tweet at Kate every day being like, hey, cool, saw this thing. Like, please don't do that, and don't do that with, you know, publicists or you know, whatever. I think, but if there's some sort of dialogue that you can create that makes sense, by all means, like, contribute. And I think people get to know you, and I know there's a lot of smaller bloggers that are really active on Twitter that, you know, you can start a conversation with, and I think that they'll respect you, and I think maybe they'll write about your song. And I think, you know, developing on the smaller level where you do have something to bring to a publicist, where it's like, hey, these like 10 blogs, you know, in LA, nationally, they actually care, and there's a reason for me to pay you and hire you. I think that's all stuff you can do on your own, and it's always helpful. And I do think, like, a lot of writers and smaller blogs actually appreciate hearing from bands, because if they discover something, or it's like they feel like they found something, and I think that that's helpful.
Well, that's what I was gonna sort of frame it as we move to the writers, is how is the best way for a band to directly communicate with you when they don't have a publicist yet? what are some successful ways and what are some maybe not as successful ways?
I think the writers should go to that. It's not going to get to me until they get to me.
Well, you know, I think cultivating a relationship is good, even if it's just via social media. But as a band, you know, if you're gonna shoot your shot, don't send me a DM on Twitter. You know, like make it count. Send me an email and say something that really represents who you are, and give me the sort of bare bones of your story and include it all there. I just think maintain a level of professionalism, like you were saying. You know, like I appreciate that people are trying, but when they kind of come at me through sort of back channels, it feels like a little bit like I don't like it as much. You know, come at me through a proper channel. My email's on my website. You know how to find me. And really make it count. And really look like you put some effort into that pitch, into that email. And if you're excited and you're putting your effort forth, I'm much more likely to too.
Yeah, I agree with Katie. I think, well, sometimes, to be honest, I love when I don't have publicists, but
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, sure. I think that is geared more towards, you know, the A-list musician, because when you start getting really high up, a publicist tends to control everything, which makes it very hard as a journalist when you want a one-on-one conversation. And I tend not to like sit at a coffee shop where I enjoy doing things, sometimes really odd, weird things. So, you know, when you have a publicist saying, don't say this, you know, you can say this, but, you know, please don't mention this thing. I don't like being told anything. Like, I don't like being told what to say or what to do. I want to do what I want to do. So it makes it challenging that you have to, you know, hear these things, but then, you know, it's part of the game too, that you have to. You also want to be respectful of a person if they really don't want to talk about something, not to bring it up, but sometimes, you know, pushing the envelope is fun. But as far as, I don't know, I mean, a lot of times when, I mean, this is really for the bigger people, but, you know, working with a publicist also means a long time of, you know, months of orchestrating what we're doing. I know if you work on a cover story or something, sometimes it's months of planning. And so it takes a lot of time and effort and, you know, sometimes I've spent months with people, you know, so that takes a lot of planning, and sometimes it doesn't always go the way you want to. But, you know, publicists are great for things too. I know journalists like, you know, that thing where everyone hates them, but I don't. I really, there's a lot of wonderful
We don't condone that message.
No, there are a lot of wonderful publicists, and you know, we all really do work well together. I think when a band's first starting, especially if they don't necessarily, what Christine was saying, need a publicist yet, because they're not to the level where you need to you don't have enough material, you're not quite there yet with your story, you haven't worked with X, Y, and Z. So I think for starting out, I think you have to build your audience. I think that's part of getting bigger, you know, going out, playing shows, getting people interested in you, having fans, knowing people. I mean, networking is a huge thing. You know, I don't personally mind being reached out to, but I think, as Katie said, it's being respectful. If you're gonna like tweet at me every day, like, I'm not really into that. But I think it's about having a balance, you know, especially if you have a single out and you don't have a publicist or anyone helping you, you have to get your word out somehow. So, you know, just especially if it's something really artistic, there are ways to be creative, but I think, yeah, it's being respectful as well.
Yeah, sorry, I have one more thing to say. If a publicist comes at you and is like, we're going to get you everything, and you don't have a record yet, they're lying to you and taking your money, don't hire that person. But when you have a record and you have something in material to use, a publicist is handy in navigating the press world so it's less scary. We're there to like guide you through it. Artists, be very, you know, they're artists, they're musicians, they're gentle souls, they're complicated and complex, and we're there to help navigate you through the system and you know, figure out who the best writers are for you and who, you know, where your music fits.
I was just going to add to that. you know, like Christine said, like if a publicist reaches out to you and, you know, they're enthusiastic, talk to other people too. Like, they might not be the best fit, you know, like I love to strategize with the bands I work with, and I love to kind of make sure we're gonna meet the same goals, you know, and make sure that it's the right team. And I think that that's a huge part of it. Like, don't be scared that, oh my gosh, I'm this unsigned band and this person reached out to me. Like, make sure it's the right fit, you know, you're gonna spend a lot of money on it, so make sure it works and make sure that you're comfortable working with that person.
That's all great. Also, artists, be nice to publicists. Don't abuse them. They have to deal with both sides. They have to deal with writers who are also finicky and complicated, and they have to deal with you who can be finicky and complicated. No shade. So we love our publicists. Can someone let me know where we're at on time? I don't have a clock up here. What time is it? It's 2:15?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So I want to get a little bit deeper into social media because I think that this is such an important element of what happens in either the buildup or the dissolution between a relationship with a band or an artist and a writer. So I was thinking about this a lot last night because I was prepping for this and I was like, yeah, never use social media to contact me. Don't do that. And then I was like, well, wait, that's not true. Like, that's not true at all. Like, I do use social media a lot to talk to other editors or to bands, and I was sort of sorting through in my mind what that relationship was. And I think for me, personally, it really is about the relationship. Like, if it is an artist that I've spent months with on a story, or if it's an artist who I've met in person and I've interviewed them a couple different times for different publications, and we tweet at each other to talk about other bands that we like. I think that there is room for that artist to DM me like, hey, did you catch that email? Or, hey, I'm gonna be in your town, do you wanna come to the show? Versus their publicist inviting me. Like, I think the pre-existing relationship is sort of what dictates that boundary. On the other hand, there are artists who have continually reached out to me via Facebook or via Twitter to the point that, or via Instagram DM, please, I think that one's a little much, but like, to the point that even if I like their music, I feel like my boundaries have been violated so many times that I don't want to talk to them. And that's like a human reaction to feeling like you can't separate your personal life and your work life. And like, obviously, especially for me, they bleed into one another all the time. Like, it's a Saturday and we're here and this is basically work for us, you know, but it's also like, I want to meet some of the people that are here. I'm probably going to make new friends out of the people that are here. So it can be super challenging to understand when it does and doesn't work. But I think that it's so prevalent and it's such a big part of my life, and probably your guys' lives, that I wanted to talk specifically about that. Like, when is it okay? Is it ever okay for someone to DM you? Or like, what are other people's boundaries like for that?
I think within reason. I mean, are you coming from like more of like a publicist or a band side or both?
I mean, I think it also is publicists DMing me or texting me or Facebook messaging me. And also, I mean, maybe more like, this is a personal struggle, but I have a hard time being like, hey, stop. This is sort of offensive. Like, you need to just email me.
Yeah.
Like, that's a hard line for me to take.
I mean, I also have like bands that like email me about like, hey, I sent you my record, and they hit me on Facebook, and I'm like, hey, you sent it to me like 16 hours ago. It's cool, I'll get back to you, you know? So, yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, a reminder is cool, but usually I will tell people like, hey, I don't use my personal Facebook to respond to work messages. Sometimes, I mean, if I know the person, like, it's kind of a different story where it's like, you know, there's some writers where it can be like, just a nudge where it's like, hey, did you get my email? It's a little time sensitive, you know, hopefully you'll get back to me. And for the most part, people are respectful, but I don't really use my personal Facebook page as like band submissions or like, here's my photo gallery. It's like, I don't really care, you know? And I always provide people with my email where it's like, hey, this is where, you know, this is how you reach out to me, and I feel like most people have their work email listed on their Twitter or whatever, and it's for the most part, it's not hard to find people otherwise. So, and also for me personally, it's a lot easier to keep track of things where it's in my inbox, where it's like, oh my god, I need to check Instagram DM, I need to check Twitter, I need to check Facebook, where it's like, if I see it in front of me, I take care of it versus having something in like 12 million places. But I do think like, you know, hitting you up or like tweeting at you like, hey, I'm gonna be in LA, like you wrote about my single, do you wanna come to my show, I'll guest list you. I think you just need to think about it and just, you know, use common sense and not like hit people constantly. I think if there's a reason, or if, you know, if you're like, oh my gosh, like you love the War on Drugs, I love the War on Drugs, and I'm gonna be at that show, maybe I'll see you there. Like something along those lines where it's like there's context and it's not just you selling yourself, where it's like, here's 17 DMs with my new single. Like, don't do that. Like, you know, like once you get that dialogue going where it's like you see them at the War on Drugs or you see them at that show, be like, hey, by the way, I sent you an email with my single, check it out. Like, no pressure. Like, I think those are kinds of ways that you can do those things on your own.
I think it's important to your point, to like build relationships with the writers or editors or publicists that you care about. Like, and don't make your first ask be like, I need this from you or I want this thing. Like, compliment a writer on a story they did, or say, oh, that really struck me in this way, and here's why. Don't ask for anything right after that. Just be like, you know, build a relationship. Somebody you want to respect you, and you want it to go both ways, and like, I think that's really important. And know who the right person is in a publication. Know the publication, know the ins and outs before you start reaching out. I mean, the more you know, the more you can figure out how you fit in to that publication, or maybe it's not the right fit for you. You know, a certain writer whose style you love and that you would love for that to be the person to one day write the ultimate profile about you. Like, you know, that doing your homework in that regard will go such a long way, and it will keep you from getting ignored.
I was just gonna say, like, make sure you're nice to everyone all along the way too, because like you never know where that person is going to end up. So it's like if you were bothering them, you know, they have like this itty bitty blog or whatever, they're bothering you, and they could end up writing for, you know, Pitchfork or Rolling Stone or whatever. So I think just making sure that you're polite and that you're using common sense along the way, just because I personally noticed this myself, and it was like someone that was at some itty bitty blog 7 years ago now was like, you know, writing tons of reviews for Rolling Stone or whatever, and it's like, you know, I got that kid into so many shows 7 years ago, and it's like, hey, you know, so, but like going back where it's like, you didn't help me all these years, and now you want my help, it's a little bit tricky. So I think just like being kind and just like cultivating that relationship from the start, just because you never know where those people are going to end up and how they're going to be able to help you down the line.
I was reading a St. Vincent profile, I think it was in the New Yorker, but I was reading like all of them, so I forget. And she said something along the lines of like, kindness is a business strategy. And I was just like, this woman, like, yes, echoing that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what everyone else said. I think it's just common sense. I mean, I know editors of mine who I'm close with, I mean, we'll text, you know, yo, did you get that edit? You know, because we're friends or we're close or we've been working for 5 years together. And, you know, I've had editors who are like, you know, strictly email, or I'll just Facebook and be like, you know, I mean, I've sent like intros on Facebook to editors, you know, because that's our relationship. So I think it's using common sense. It depends what you know, how you guys interact, and as far as bands contacting, I mean, I think we've already said that, but I think you know, I don't mind if people reach out to me, and I think there are ways to do it that are better than others, but I think, you know, it's also trial and error, I guess. I mean, every journalist is different, every editor is different, so some really don't like it and will tell you so, and others are cool with it. So I think it's just about, you know, who you're pitching to and who they are as a person and how they'll react to it. So.
Cool. You're good? Okay. I think that we are going to open it up to the floor for a few questions.
An artist to pitch for me. I think that's strange, unless that was your best friend, unless you provided some context. or like whatever. But I would ask maybe what his strategy was. I'm sure he had one, but yeah, I don't know. I never use that. So no, Caroline.
I think it goes back to a boundary thing. Like if you knew the editor and you were going through the proper channels with your publicist, and there hadn't been any response, and you thought that there probably would have been, if you guys had talked, then it makes sense to send the email. If you're cold emailing an editor after their publicist has already pitched, I think that goes back to the boundary thing. It feels a little bit like a violation or like a guilt trip. Like what if the female artist who made this email to you, like then do you care? Like that's like a little intense. Yeah, I think that it's a boundary thing, and I think it's also like maybe if you were at a show in real life with an editor and you guys had already been having a conversation, then it would be appropriate to be like, you know, I actually have this video I made, like what do you think about it? But as far as just you following up on a publicist, I personally wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah, I was gonna agree. I think that that's pretty strange, and I've never had that situation. And at that point, I would probably talk to my publicist and be like, hey, has there been any feedback? Is there any other outlets we can approach, or why are you asking me to do this if you don't know this person? Like, I think that's the point where you either like call it, figure out what's going on, or move on to another target because something, there's something going on there that is a little bit out of the ordinary.
That you think describe your sound, figure out something that's really clear and direct. Like, if I see jazz noise band, I know what that is. If I see pop punk band, I know what that is. They evoke very different things in my mind. So whether you are a jazz noise or a pop punk, make sure it resonates with you. If you wouldn't want to be framed as pop punk, don't put that in your headline, even if you think that will get some sort of placement, because that won't actually resonate with what you want for your band. So make sure that it's true to you, and just try and get something very, very specific. I get almost 1,000 emails a day. Like, you have to get something specific to get my attention. It's just the fact of it, yeah. Does anyone else want to?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think in press releases, it's also having like the who, what, when, where, why. I want to know what your music sounds like, you describing it. I want to have the music to listen to myself. Picture is always good to kind of give an idea of what your vibe is. I think also, put in the shows you're playing, where they're going to be. It's just, so you can have if we're interested, we want to go see you live, especially if you're playing in Los Angeles or wherever you're located. It's just having the information available and not having, I hate to say this, but there's a lot of work to be done and we're all busy. So, if I have to go search every little thing because you didn't include it, it's probably I'm just gonna, go on to the next email. We get so many emails. I get over like 1,000 a day too, so we can't read it all. So, especially, and also a subject line's really important. Maybe something a little more interesting than, the next new band coming out tomorrow. Like, I'm not gonna open that. So get creative with the subject line and have, don't put too much of your story in the press release, because then it's like you're divulging everything, but just enough to pique our interest and say, oh, like that's interesting, I want to know more about that. So,
to your point, I think subject lines can make or break your email. Like, and everybody's different, but some are just, they're so long and you have this, like, too much information. I like short and sweet. Like, if you could personalize it and say, like, for Katie, my band, album name, whatever, and just sort of make something that's short, sweet, and it looks like someone has tailored it to you, versus some crazy all caps, overwhelming thing. Like, I'm not going to read that, and then your email is not going to get read that you put all of this time and effort into. So, really punch up your subject lines, and your chances are that much better.
To to add to that, I mean, you can tell a mass email versus something that's tailored just to you. I mean, things like that, and we notice those things. You know, if you put Dear Danielle instead of to all of you, like, we notice, you know, we do notice those things. So I think if you really, and you know, I think it's nice too, and it's flattering if someone writes me, a publicist and or the band themselves, you know, hey, I just read this awesome story you did in whatever magazine, like it was really cool, this is how I felt. It just lets us know, you know, wow, they're reading my stuff, and that's really awesome that people are reading stuff. And even if it's not about my work, you know, someone else, hey, did you read this thing in whatever magazine? I really enjoyed that. Like, you know, be personal and also, you know, say more than just, this is my stuff. And I think it will go a long way.
Final thought, if you are on a label that has a really well-defined sound, like Epitaph or Anti or something like that, or if you are opening for a band who has a really defined sound, I think those are also good things to include. It's just like to try and get a signifier so we get a sense without, like Danielle said, having to do a Google search of what the context is.
I think that you need to be conscious of the roster of the person that you're working with. Like, if you make pop music and you have somebody that only works jazz, like, chances are it's not sticking. And I mean, for me, I send bi-weekly reports. So I would ask your publicist for a report and any sort of feedback that they have, just so you kind of are like, okay, you know, these 6 outlets passed, or here's what's pending, here's what's confirmed. I mean, because press is changing. There's so many bands, there's so many writers, like all these people are getting 1,000 emails a day. Like, how do we get your band to stick out when, you know, we're fighting against 1,000 other bands, you know? So, I mean, just ask. I think you shouldn't be scared to ask your publicist and just be like, hey, like if they're in LA, can we get a coffee? Like, what's working? How do we change this strategy? Or how can we frame it? You know, like I've definitely had bands be like, you know, this story isn't working. Like, there's this other side of me where it's like, I love cats. Can I get on like every cat blog, you know, or something where I've had that. So it's like, I think just being able to talk and have a legitimate conversation with whoever you're working with to make sure to be like, hey, like I'm, you know, self-funding this and I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And if it's not working for you, maybe it's not working for them, you know? So I think being honest and being open and do ask for reports, you know, like I send them every other week or whatever. And, you know, like I feel like for me, like I try not to take on too many clients. So it's like if you're on a roster with somebody that has like 27 bands and they're all on major labels and you're this itty bitty, you know, self-released or whatever, it's probably not the right fit and you're probably not going to be, you know, the person that they're dedicating their attention to. So I think, you know, finding that person that's going to dedicate their time to you, I think is really important. And the fact that, like, people shouldn't have time to get on a phone call with you or meet with you if they're in the same city and just, like, kind of tell you what's working and what's not and brainstorm with you on things. So that matters.
I'll add to what Caroline said, have an open, open communication with your publicist, talk about goals, send reports. You know, with my clients and artists, usually like in real time I'll be telling them, hey, I just secured this, or this person wants to interview you, or hey, I had a great meeting with this person, or trust your publicist, and if they're not giving you information, they might not be doing their job.
I think there's sort of another question in your question, which is, here we have 2 publicists. We know I've worked with them both for a long time. I will vouch for them. I think they're great publicists. There are a lot of publicists that aren't that way, that will take your money and not do a lot of work. So something in your question is like, you don't feel like you're getting what you need, and you have sort of a doubt, maybe. And I think that there can be something in that. Like, trust yourself. Like, you're an artist. You're already someone that's really attuned to a lot of emotional and spiritual things in the world. So maybe there is like another trusted friend that you have that you can, you know, send your music to, or send a piece that was written on, or even ask them about a conversation that you had with your publicist. Like, one of my best friends manages artists, and I was telling her, a young artist that I have a personal relationship with, and I had to tell him, and we're friends, and I had to tell him, like, I thought that music video was bad. I like your song, but I didn't like the music video. Like, it's really hard for me to do that as a journalist and as someone who also has this personal relationship, because I know that I have a lot of power there and that can get really complicated. So she was like, yeah, that's basically what managers do. We actually have to tell them the truth. So if you're not at a place where you know, have a manager yet, like, is there someone in your life that you really trust that you know can tell you the hard truth? Like, yes, it's your music, or no, your music is great. Like, I wonder if there's a different issue. I think that could be really helpful for you as well.
Print versus web. Print outlets are increasingly fewer. They will have earlier deadlines. They will have higher needs for editing lead time, for art, whatnot. So I think just getting familiar with the publications you like, and just, I think a courtesy email to an editor, which is like, can you tell me a little bit about your deadlines? That person should probably be pretty cool with that. The writers will totally know the answer to that too. You know, we want, as editors, as writers, for a story to come out with as much of a hook as possible. So several days out from the launch of a record or a show, or, you know, yeah, we don't really typically want it afterward unless the story is amazing. We want to be able to share it several times on the social network, so we don't necessarily want to come out the day of. Sometimes that's fine, but like, you know, we want to give the story the opportunity to get as much readers as possible at the same time. Same way an artist would want as many listeners as possible, as many fans as possible. So it's going to be different publication to publication. That makes it harder for sending out one big email, but again, targeting who you want, knowing their schedules, deadlines, being realistic about print versus web, which is another thing we get a lot of. I think that's kind of it. But you girls can probably say more.
Yeah, it's what Mara said. I mean, each publication I work for has different deadlines for things, especially I tend to write more print than online. So our deadlines sometimes are like 6 months out. So they're already, you know, done for the year and we're on to next year. So as far as print stuff, I think the earlier the better, because there's a lot of stories being written, and also the journalist is on a bunch of stories at one time. So I think, you know, sending your stuff out and then following up, you know, a few weeks later or a month later, you know, a follow-up email is always really good to just remind a person. But I think, yeah, as far as online, the deadlines are not as far out, but still, no one's really, like Mara said, writing something after the fact, because the whole point is you're pegging it to an album release, a single, a video, whatever it is. So I think it's definitely important to get out before whatever. And I mean, I prefer, I mean, you can attach your music. I mean, usually SoundCloud's a good, like, one link I like, because it just gives you everything right there, especially if the, like, press release is in there and your bio, just all in one place, so I don't have to, like, go to 40 different Google searches. But yeah, other than that,
same, but more time rather than less. Like, I think you'd be surprised by how many publicists and bands reach out, like, hey, do you want to review my show tomorrow? And it's like, well, you know, maybe, but it's not going to happen, because I don't have any time to pitch it, to get a response back. So, you know, just give us a healthy bumper. Obviously not too much, because we're going to forget about it, but a few weeks for sure, if you know that you're pegging for online.
I think you said something interesting, which is it's hard to get press after your record comes out. That is 100% true. Guess what? It's hard to get people to read about your record after it comes out. So I think sometimes it feels like, oh, why doesn't it matter now? It's like, you have to understand that we are dealing with audience constraints as well. It's not just the editors that don't have as much interest a couple weeks or a couple months after it comes out. It's often the readers or music listeners or your fans. Like, people want the current thing. Like, that's really a thing. FOMO, like, all of these things are at play. Like, they want the thing right now, and we're all working within that. Not just you, but also editors and, you know, traffic goals and, like, these sorts of things that we have to deal with that you don't always see. So, and I think it goes back to a really early thing. Like, if you put your record out and then a couple months later, like, something like really interesting and fascinating in your life or in the record's life happens, like, pitch that, like, bring that to the forefront. Be like, hey, this thing happened, our record came out 3 months ago, but this thing is happening right now. That's a story. The other much more functional follow-up for that is, if you have a show in the city, pitch an alt-weekly. There's so few now, RIP, but pitch someone that is regional when you are there on a tour, and you can do an in-person interview, or you can have a peg for, hey, this musician is here now. And then that's a great way for a lot of writers. Maybe they did miss your record and they want a way in. That's a way in. Give the writer a way in that makes it current right now. Yeah.
To add to that too, it's relationship building again, but invite the writer to your show. I get emails, as I'm sure you guys do too, of bands that are really brand new, like, hey, do you want to come out and review the show? And it's like, I need to first know what you sound like and know that I like you and know that you have an interesting story. But a great way to establish that is just to offer the invite and put someone on a guest list and, open the door.
Okay, I have a lot of thoughts, so I'm going to start off. Okay, so first of all, I think that you should think of it like a conversation that you're having with a friend. If you meet up with one of your friends for coffee, are you telling her about 4 years ago I moved to Joshua Tree? No, you're like, I'm almost done with this project. Like, here's some things that have happened in the last couple months in my life. Like, here's where I'm at now. Like, you're not going to come to a writer and be like, 4 years ago I did this, like that. Like I was just saying to him, like, what's happening right now? And of course, if it's relevant to the story, which it sounds like it is because you had a background with your sisters for a long time, that's part of who you are, then a good writer and a good journalist is going to follow up and get that for context as well, but I doubt that would be compelling to them as the meat of your story. So for that, I would say, we're all people. Like, what's going on with you right now that you would talk to with a person that you already know? Like, that's going to be the story. It's not going to be something that happened 4 years ago or 8 years ago, although those elements might come into play in the conversation or in the bio. Yeah, so that's going to be in there. And if that's something that the journalist themselves is like, oh, I have a great follow-up to that, they'll include that. But I wouldn't try and make that the meat of who you are, because that is no longer the meat of who you are. You live in Joshua Tree now. That's the meat of who you are. As far as the second part, I lived in New York for about 5 years, and I moved here last year. And I will say that I think it's hard. It's hard to move around a lot. It's hard to try and get established in a new scene, figure out who you can trust, figure out who has the same interests as you. But I don't think that it's something that you should pursue or not pursue based on how you think it would help your career. I think that you should be a person first. If something in your heart is like, I have to go to Nashville, fucking go to Nashville. Like, that will work itself out. Like, I think that you have to be a person first. You have to follow your heart first. And your art has to come after that. People that are always putting like, oh, I'm doing this for industry, like, it doesn't work. Even if it works for a little bit, it doesn't work long term. People see through it, So that's my personal advice. Not saying it's fact.
Agreed.
Also with the story, I think there's something beautiful in that. Not necessarily would be the crux of the story, but there's something about finding yourself, which I think would be beautiful if someone wanted to interview you of like, not only where you are now, but moving all around. What does that say about you? What does that mean? That's the things where you grasp like, well, why did you do those things? What in your life was a struggle that made you that way or didn't make you that way? I think that as a journalist we pull out. So I don't not necessarily want to know like every last thing about 4 years in wherever you lived, but like, why did you travel so much and what happened with your sisters? Why did you break up? Those are the things I think as a story we want to know, which will make all the readers interested. Like, what about this person makes her that way? And yeah, with the second thing, I mean, I know every person had told me like, don't live in Los Angeles. You need to be in New York with all the magazines, and that's how you're going to make it in this industry. But I didn't like New York, and I didn't want to live there. So I think it's about plotting your own way and creating it, even if someone's telling you, as a freelancer, everyone's like, why would you ever do that? Like, work at a magazine, and I've been offered jobs, but it's not what I want to do. You have to be true to yourself and live where you want to and start your own path, wherever that is.
And I think it's worth noting that you've been very successful in LA, so, follow your heart.
And if you don't like where you're living and you're not happy with your life, your art's probably going to suck too. So what's the point, you know?
I was just gonna basically say the same thing, and I think that you've lived in pretty magical places, and it's going to add to your story. Like living in Joshua Tree, like it's beautiful, and why are you leaving, and how did that, you know, make an impact on your art? And you're going to Nashville, another musical city, you know. So I feel like there's going to be a lot to add to the story, and it seems like if someone's going to sit down with you and like talk about it, then you have a lot going for you, and it would be a good in-depth piece. I think that there's bits and pieces of it that you can add to your bio, and I think you'd have a really great bio based on what you know. And for me, like I'm all for moving. I visit a city and I'm like, cool, be up here and actually do it. So I think, you know, like if you're doing it for the right reasons, and if, you know, you're not just doing it, oh, I want to live in Nashville because there's, you know, tons of music or whatever. If you're doing it because that's what your heart's telling you to do it. And also get to know bands there, you know, because you can be like, oh cool, like I'll connect you with, you know, if a band's on tour, you can connect them with your friends in LA or in Joshua Tree to help, you know, put shows together, and you can repay the favor, and you'll establish yourself as a musician in Nashville too, where hopefully someone will be like, cool, like I'll put you on my bill in Nashville. So it's like the more that people that you know in different cities, the more beneficial it's going to be to your career.
Awesome. Well, I think it's important to remember, someone brought this up earlier, but that like things are connected. Like there was the band that had a bartender as a member, so they brought in cocktails. Think about the ways that you can get an intersection of people, you know, so if it's somewhere like LA Weekly, like they cover music, they cover Los Angeles. So if it's a brand new venue in LA and it's maybe, you know, it's in an area that hasn't had music venues, or there's some history to the venue, you know, if there is a way that you can get like the city angle and the entertainment angle, then you've already hit two things for them. It's already a more compelling story. If there's a comedian that is also in bands, or he used to be in bands and now he's a comedian, if there's any sort of interplay like that, I think that that is a really cool way to pitch something that hits a number of different just genres of entertainment.
Oh, sorry. And then personally, it's supposed to be all-encompassing. So if it's generic and feels like it's just information, that's fine, because your tailored pitches come from reaching out to people. So if you're reaching out a music publication, you're going to focus on the music. And then if you want to pitch that to, I don't know, something else, like a comedy blog, like focus on the comedy. Just like send your press release out, and then like sort of a blanket statement, and then tailor your pitches to the writers.